Чисті очі ночі, розшукую там кристалики страху. І краплями граду, увага мовча. Всередині стисла рука на змаху. Чекаю враз, натягнуті нерви. Носій на місці, рух все життя. Час очікування стає нестерпним. Затримую подих, повний контакт. Азов, повний контакт. Азов, повний контакт. Азов, повний контакт. Азов, повний контакт. Спазм бою стискає серце. Рву дистанцію, шукаю ціль. Дух Святослава у грудях б'ється. Пульсує в жилах адреналін. Стаю зріз, страху немає. Пав, щоб піднятись, завмер час. Стаю зріз, сили втрачаю. Болю немає, є повний контакт.
Україна!
Україно!
Свята мати героїв!
Свята мати героїв!
Сіди до серця мого!
Сіди до серця мого!
Волинь бурю вітрів кавказьких!
Прилинь бурю вітер кавказьких!
Скріпи мій дух!
Скріпи мій дух!
Зартуй волю!
Царствуй волю!
Серце замешка моєму!
Серце замешкай моєму!
Прости мене до ясних чинів!
Прости мене до ясних чинів!
У тих чинах хай знайду я смерть!
У тих чинах хай знайду я смерть!
Солодку смерть у муках за тебе!
Солодку смерть у муках за тебе!
І розплинуся в тобі!
І розпливеться в тобі!
Та вічно житиму в тобі!
Навічно житиму в тобі!
Відвічна Україна!
Відвічна Україна!
Свята!
Свята!
Могутня! Соборна! Слава Україні! Слава нації! Україна! Україна! Україна!
And good evening and salutations, everyone. We don't have an intro this week because things are still falling into place. It's good to see you all. We are back from a little summer action. Just had to, take a little time off from the show. Also, it's been a stretch this year, and been enjoying some time with the bros, a little time with the family. Did a little stuff on the side for the movement, whatever you want to call it. Um, I do like to, joke about ourselves sometimes. But at the same time, okay, sorry, I got all the stuff going on here also in the background. And that should be Alex, hopefully with the settings set. Alex, I can hear you. You can hear me?
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good.
All right, guys. Yeah, what's been going on in the world? Quite a lot. It seems like a new border war just started. Yeah, over in the bushes there. Um, anyway, sorry. What else we got? Okay, so we're not going to cover that so much. The PowerPoint. There's a lot to cover. We got the corruption protests, the Thailand-Cambodian war, the pseudo genocide with I forget the name of that ethnic group in southern Syria, Dara province. Anyway, we have that in the notes for the show. What else? Going over to Ukraine here again. There's been some movements on the map that are not encouraging. We'll cover that in the map section later here, and some stuff with Trump too. So let's start off with sorry, one second. Let me just respond to that in our chat. Okay. Okay, so let's start off with the light stuff here. So another jungle war. Let me actually bring up a map for that though, because it might explain it a bit better. And let me see if I can find it on the map part of the bit here. Okay, I gotta learn this all over again because it's been 2 weeks. Here we go. Okay, so I got that ready for the Ukraine stuff, but let's go over to Southeast Asia here just really quickly. Okay, so what we're looking at here is Cambodia and Thailand, obviously. Most of the conflict has been going on along this border right here and along the Pilin area here too. But most of the action is up here. Long story short, it's a border dispute. The crux of it is over a number of temples and highland points that are settled, that have been, how to put it, that the disputed territories are claimed by both sides, of course. Um, One of the bigger ones, I don't know if it'll pop up here without squiggly names here, but anyway, so the way this border was set up is actually fairly interesting. It was set up by a water demarcation or flow demarcation. Whichever side the water flowed, whether it was north or south, that would be the dividing line along the border here. This was decided by the French colonial authorities and the Kingdom of Thailand at the time in the 1880s, 1890s, around there. And around that time, there was a temple somewhere in this range here that the Cambodians claimed was theirs, but so did the Thai. So this got escalated after World War II, and in typical brilliant global court fashion, they sided with the Cambodians on that with their claim, but at the same time, the Thai have ownership of the land around it. Now, that might not seem like a big deal, but the way it works is that it's only accessible from the Thai side of the border, and the Cambodians can look up from their side of the border and say, well, that's ours, but we can't get to it. So it's one of those just really retarded bits of international justice, lawyering, whatever you want to call it, that really settled nothing and probably exaggerated the problem even worse. Um, and a lot of these temples have to do with from the area of the Khmer Empire. Khmer? Yeah, the Khmer Rouge. Sorry, I was remembering some Star Trek episode there. The Khmer Empire at the time built a lot of temples along these highlands here, and both Thai and Cambodian nationalists claim them as theirs. So at the same time, there's not really an incentive for both sides to really escalate to a full-scale war. Cambodia just doesn't have it in their arsenal to really escalate, aside from maybe defending the highland areas. And Thailand doesn't have an incentive to do so, namely because close to 10 to 15% of their economy is tourism, roughly 8 to 9% for Cambodia, and wars tend to scare tourists. And at the same time, there's a political crisis within the Thai government because the prime minister, I forgot her name, she said some nice things about the Cambodians, calling, I think, the leader of Cambodia's uncle, and she started criticizing the Thai military. And if anyone's been in the Pacific Fleet of the United States, they're very familiar with how Thailand works, at least in some capacity. You don't criticize the military in the Thai government. Um, they're basically the main power and authority in the country, despite having a successful constitutional monarchy for the most part. The powers that be are really in the military, and they've had successive coups that have been very successful in that country, unlike the last one in Turkey. Point being is you don't go around doing that sort of thing without expecting you to lose your job in politics, and that's exactly what's happening to the Prime Minister of Thailand. So Thailand is unstable internally. There's been a lot of protests against the Prime Minister, and Cambodia just isn't in a spot to really fight a larger war. So we'll probably see nothing more than just some border skirmishes and footage with rockets and mortars and some drones and stuff. So yeah, what else we got going on here? Did cover a little bit more. See if this map can load. Some stuff going on in Somalia. The Al Shabaab is actually moving in pretty close to. What is it? There is Mogadishu. In this area here, they're doing pretty well against the not to say Anzac, the Africom forces that are in the area. They haven't been really doing too much to push back against the terrorists in that area. So that's what's going on in the world for the most part, guys. We've got a lot of stuff to cover here too, though. But the last few weeks have been pretty hard for people that have grown up in the 80s and early 90s. We've lost Ozzy, we've lost Hulk Hogan, We've even lost the jazz guy from King of the Hill. I forgot his name. Guy, I was gonna make a joke out of that.
Chuck Mangione.
Chuck Mangione. Thank you.
Yes.
So we don't have those cool horns anymore of his to really do anything with. So anyway, sorry, let me do this here. Sorry, I'll talk to that in a minute. What else? There's a lot to cover. Yeah, so the corruption stuff. I do have a selection of articles about that, though. I'll give you a little flavor tasting here, though. I did a little discussion and deep diving with Alex here on that. It's not as simple as I'd like it to be for a lot of people. It's I'm not really going to say that these two, the NAPO. I'm sorry, let me look at it again. NABU, sorry, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, and the SAPO, which is a specialized anti-corruption prosecutor's office. I'm not going to say they're really the knights in shining armor that the people on the ground are protesting about. Um, they've been rather ineffectual. They've had low confidence from the public, and the responses we've been seeing from the photos I've been seeing also. But there's been some right sector people out there too. Don't get me wrong, but it's kind of the typical sort of people. They're not as bad as say like Portland or Seattle, but if you're going to imagine them from Eastern Europe, that kind of fits the bill. Um, and as far as like how to put it, in my long hearing a lot of all these podcasts I've been listening to because they've been talking about what is it, democracy and independent corruption agents. You know, all this little loaded language, right? You know, the trying to make it have some sort of veneer that it's above the politics of Ukraine, that it shouldn't be scrutinized by the general public, so to speak. And that just kind of set off my nose a little bit. I'm like, I'm going to have to sniff and dig this out a little bit more. So I did a little digging into some of the donors of this. I'm like, okay, so if it's an independent couple of offices, like they have to get funding from somewhere. The people have to get selected from somewhere, and there has to be a process for all this, though, too, and oversight. So what originally started off was is the General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine was meant to take over these two bodies. And that would mean that the caseload would be handed down from what would be essentially the Attorney General's office for Americans. The General Prosecutor's Office would start directing where these bureaus or offices would start looking for corruption. That would be, according to the other side, the protests bad because it forces them to focus on what the president asks them to do, and that would mean not investigating the president if it meant that these prosecutors and anti-corruption bureaucrats started sniffing him out, that being Zelensky. Um, on top of that, though, the mayor of Kyiv, Klitschko, has had a lot of scuffles between him and Zelensky, and a lot of other people have been criticizing Zelensky for mild corruption. It's nothing like Yanukovych or anyone else before him, but it's probably there. I should have done a little bit more digging to that oligarch. I forgot his name. It's not Kolomoisky because he's basically neutered at this point. Um, I forgot his name. Anyway, Yermak, I think is the guy's name. Anyway, supposedly he's the second guy running the whole show. But anyway, the core issue is the independence of these two offices, though, and the independence of them is, I think, should be scrutinized more because from what I could tell, their funding sources, based off a little bit of research, was mainly from oil. What was it? You remember some of the sources because it was ExxonMobil, Alex, Shell, and there was the IMF involved in that too. Do you remember some of the other ones?
It was all energy sector.
It was energy
Are
sector.
the major
Okay.
ones that
Okay.
stuck out to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
For the that advisory board
Yeah.
that influenced the appointments. Yep.
Mhm. Okay. So how it works, guys, is that the funding comes from mainly Western energy companies, if you want to qualify that, and the IMF. Ukraine having to take on these loans, they've had to meet some, for lack of a better term, austerity measures because, as we saw with Greece in 2014, 2015, and these loans have certain stipulations on whether it's liberalizing the marketplace, transparency in some things, which isn't bad. I'm not saying a lot of these things are bad. I'm just saying I'll get to that in a minute. Um, and in some cases, opening up the liberalization of the economy, right? So, in my travels in Eastern Europe, I often come across people. Sometimes people are like, "Yeah, we want less corruption." I'm like, "Well, that just makes sense. That's an old problem of the old post-Soviet bloc there." At the same time, they have a healthy criticism of any authority that kind of steps in and does that, though. And I'll give you an example, without giving too much away. Austria, in a weird way, has actually been a good, how to put it, a good example of Western takeover with corruption or anti-corruption means. Um, People are very familiar with the layout of Austria. It's a very mountainous country. It's hard for timber in this case to grow there. It's very alpine, but it takes a long time for alpine woods to grow. They're not very keen on cutting down their own forests, needless to say. So they go over to the Balkans, and people are familiar with European geography will know the Danube runs through Austria, Germany being the headwaters of that river, but I forget the other river. It joins up in Austria, so they're kind of the major headwaters of the biggest river in Europe, and well, that part of Europe. So they go downstream and they start looking at the poorer countries and start saying, well, you're corrupt, you're corrupt, you're corrupt. We need to liberalize your economy, open it up for foreign competition, and of course, because Western countries are richer and have more organized businesses, typically at a larger scale, they'll go in there and start owning, say, tracts of forest in this case. And they'll buy out the mills, they'll buy out the truckers, they'll buy out the loggers, and they'll just start deforesting major tracts of land. They'll import the timber and they'll just build their new houses from these poor countries, and they protest against that because they don't want their forests to be ravaged, basically, because it is thick clear cutting. They don't do like strips like you would think they would do it because it's Europe. But they do a lot of clear cutting, and out here the PNW, we see that a lot. That's one thing I don't like is just the absolute just devastation. It's just absolutely a blight upon the land to see these dead, dying trunks and just dry timber. It becomes a fire hazard, and it's just a big money grab for a lot of logging companies. Those are blue collar workers for the most part, but at the same time, there's better management that could be done. So anyway, that's just one example of a Western company coming in to take over an industry. So whenever we hear these sort of anti-corruption means, it's kind of the start of that, though. Really, they start opening up the country for foreign companies like ExxonMobil and Shell. Start making some moves in these new markets, though, and Ukraine's a huge market, right? Um, if everyone does return home, you could have a population of 40 million people. That's a lot of people. That's kind of the average for most global nations, but anyway. Uh, and they have a lot of resources. And that means if they can start extracting a lot of those resources out of Ukraine, like we saw with Trump in the mineral deal, like it's already kind of happening. Um, that means that Ukraine can start making some money on the side too, but it has to be done correctly, like the mineral deal. And again, kind of going back over to the Nabu and Sapu stuff. I know this is kind of long-winded, guys, but it is a complicated issue, though, and I had to do a little dig, and I kind of have to give this new information to you guys. Um, the same sort of people that protest for these sort of democratic values are the ones that are opening up societies for LGBT stuff, and all the other issues we see socially. And these are some of the demands that some of these companies also have, though. But we've seen a healthy pushback just even 4 weeks ago by the right wingers against the LGBT stuff in Kiev and Lviv. Sorry. And that's kind of my worry with some of this, though, is that if the more successful, if it does happen, we'll start seeing some of that start to manifest. Maybe not so much in the social spaces in Ukraine, but right now, it does seem like Zelensky did back down publicly, though. We haven't seen him sign the new law yet, but supposedly the reason why he also wanted to bring in these two offices was to fight against Russian corruption and Russian interference, though. There was some SBU. I don't think might not have been SBU. Might have been some other security agency, but they did some raids on these offices there. They didn't really find anything. The worst they found was like tickets for traffic violations and stuff like that. So it was kind of a shakedown, to be honest. Though that's just kind of Eastern European politics sometimes. And yeah, it didn't seem good for Zelensky, to be honest. Though this really shook his confidence. A lot of people internationally. Probably rightly so. This is just kind of the nature of the game. He went in there as a quote outsider, to go and shake up the system, and he became part of the system he was trying to fight. That's just how politics works, it seems, quite most of the time. So he's been trying to consolidate his circle around him. A lot of the people he's brought into his administration are from the entertainment industry, stuff like that, because we know he's an actor and partially Jewish, but that's debatable how Jewish he is sometimes. But at the same time, it's just an interesting, how to put it. The last takeaway I want to give this to you guys also is like, what is the major priorities for people internationally, even domestically? It seems like in Ukraine now, because this rose to the top of the headlines. Ukraine was suddenly back in the headlines, despite the war grinding on into its fourth year here, right? But people are worried about that. They're worried about the corruption stuff. God, what was the other thing from Ukraine? Um, Sorry, I think it had negotiations and then the war itself. Yeah, so it's like the war should be the top priority of everything because that is the existential threat to. I'm sorry, the drone stuff. So it goes corruption, drones, and the war, right? The existential threat's coming from Russia. It's not coming from the corrupt bureaucrats in Kiev, but it's not a great thing either. It's like that's your second fight after you win the peace, and I think this is the danger of normalcy, if that makes sense to you guys, that people have become so used to this high kinetic exchange, even with drones, like literally every night for Kiev and all of Ukraine, that people have just started to digest that, and they're worried about the drones dropping on their heads. But then you also have people worried about the corruption in the capital. But then you have the guys actually defending their country, and they're just like, well, what the fuck about us? And there's been some good developments. Don't get me wrong. Trump's finally coming around. It seems like, and a lot of the weapons are actually flowing back into Ukraine. I think one of those deals is actually close to $500 million, so that's good. Um, at the same time, it speaks of society in a really bad way. So we don't see any developments really with negotiations either towards finding a peace, though. There are continuous exchanges with POWs, but nothing really conclusive as even moving as far as ceasefires go. So that's discouraging to say the least, though. We would like to see the war end, but Russia's going to keep pushing as long as they think they can gain some sort of ground. So that kind of gets a little bit into it there, guys. I'm sorry I kind of went on a little bit about that, though, but it is important to kind of like scrutinize also the other side about this, though, because the only people I've been really focusing on has been Zelensky. He deservingly as he is of it, though. I'm also wary of like people saying that these are independent commissions and stuff like that, though. What Alex was saying earlier is the process, though, related to the appointment of these prosecutors and other people like that. So there's an international body of advisors and observers that appoint people based off of their selected credentials that these observers and advisors like that go into these bodies. And as far as I understand it, Ukraine doesn't have a whole lot of oversight over these offices, though. And that to me is kind of a sovereignty issue too. It's like, well, hold on. You're telling me that these people can be appointed by international parties and then we're subject to them? I don't know. As far as being as nationalist goes, that violates a lot of principles for me. Despite it, there's still being a corruption issue. So, like, I'll leave that up to the Ukrainians to really decide how to really, if that really is worth having that sort of oversight. But at the same time, to me, out of principle, I'm kind of like I would scale underneath that a little bit. But again, so as far as the efficacy of these guys, they haven't been really doing too many big cases. They've done some, but the corruption is still kind of there. It's not as bad as it used to be, but at the same time, again, as I said, it's not really something to really go home and write that the problem is being solved. And with the way these people are appointed, though, They could select people that are very like liberalizing of the economy, though. So it depends on the personality and what these prosecutors go after. Yeah, you can select what sort of people are going to do the right things for you, though, too. So that's the interesting thing about this whole thing, though, too, is that it is also an opportunity for other people to make money. Anyway, so do you have any thoughts on that, Alex?
Yeah, I'll add on to that. One of the more disturbing things I saw was the International Monetary Fund
Right.
being involved in the economic advisory role in these appointment positions. And if you guys know anything about the IMF, they have a terrible track record when it comes to um, like nations in crisis doing economic recovery plans, especially in a place like Ukraine that's like war stricken. So that's a huge red flag, and they need to nip that in the fucking bud while they still can. So
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure this out here. YouTube has always been a problem for me, though. I think I have it privatized somehow, but I haven't been able to figure out that problem yet. Anyway, sorry. Anyway, so anyway, let's just move on with the show here, guys. I do want to shout out Entropy, 24 people on there. Thank you very much. If you guys
nice.
want to chat on chat there, please engage us. I got a few people on Rumble, and our house, as usual, is being stacked up in Odyssey. And good to see you all guys today. Say no way to Yahweh says good lesson today. Nice. Appreciate the uh, confidence there, bud. Again, please like and share the show, guys, wherever you guys are seeing it. I wish I could do better with YouTube, but I need to just get that unfucked somehow. It's functionality between all these. I got like 5 platforms right now, I think. Anyway, you get what you get if it's free. Let me think here. Yeah. Do you have any other notes you want to talk about, Alex, before we get on to the PowerPoint? I guess. We'll have to start with the map actually, because we haven't talked about it in a minute.
About Ukraine or what?
Anything really. I mean, we have 3 weeks to catch up on, so this is going to be a bit of a talking show, I guess.
Oh well, I guess. Did you catch the Zelensky interview by chance?
No, I did not.
Okay. So he was saying Ukraine's war plan is it's open to the possibilities of fighting until like 2032
sorry, I
or
heard
like
that.
2034.
Yeah, I heard that bit.
Yeah.
I heard that bit.
What are your thoughts on that?
Um,
That's a lot of cripples.
yeah, I don't. I'm not. I'm trying to be diplomatic about this too. Because the casualties I see coming out, at least put out by Ukrainsky Pravda, is about 1,000, 1,200 a day for the Russians. I just don't think both parties can wage a war that long. At the same time, I think he's just saying. I think that's just rhetoric to say that Europe has
Probably,
to invest in
kind of,
itself
yeah.
and understand that we're in a new phase of history, basically.
I hope so.
Well, yeah, I mean, he has to say these things to say, "Hey, guys, like, get your shit out of the welfare state, start investing in your common defense."
Yeah.
Prokopenko, I was going to mention that earlier. I'll just get into it right now. Sorry, guys, we're getting back into it, so we're kind of bebopping around before we get into the PowerPoint today. Let me just find the article here, because he did an opinion piece recently on what he's saying is World War III, which I find really kind of odd. But again, I think it is just rhetoric. So let me bring that up here really quick. I'm going to kill the map briefly. Sorry, I got to find it again. Okay, so kill that. I got to transition that. Go to the article window. And then there we go. Okay, so this is this is from Ukrainsky Pravda, written by Prokopenko, who's commander of Azov, 12th Special Forces Brigade. I'll give you the rundown here. He's talking about the authoritarian bloc, but his point was that a lot of the toothlessness that has been happening in Ukraine was because the previous administrations weren't arming Ukraine as they should have, and even after seeing the 2008 war in Georgia and then what happened in 2014, even up into 2018, you saw Zelensky trying to neuter, in a sense, Ukraine because of the Minsk II Accords. Some could argue that he was forced into that. Others will say that's just his natural proclivity to do the sort of things. But and even nuclear disarmament. But at the same time, he goes on to say how it's Azov and not Western militaries that are the ones becoming a sort of inventing the new generation hybrid conflict. Sorry. Um, and where he's saying the very concept of military and state effectiveness are being tested for resilience. Large scale war is not about professional armed forces and precision strikes that end in 2 hours. It's about the capacity to wage long and resource-intensive campaigns successively, really. And he says that the Azov model is an asymmetric institution that operates within the framework of the regular army while retaining the flexibility unique to network-based structures. This is where the strategic value lies. When it comes to the armies of the future, environments like this will form their core, not cores built upon the NATO handbook, but units capable of responding rapidly, of adapting and acting autonomously, and even without interruption even when completely cut off from the main forces. This is where the example of Azov becomes critically important amid the chaos. Azov does not merely survive; it built its own adaptive architecture of warfare. Anyway, so he's talking about more about the evolution of Azov, and we had this conversation with Stierlitz earlier, how the Azov movement kind of pushed Ukraine into updating its army to NATO standards, but now Azov, according to Prokopenko's word here, has evolved beyond NATO standards. I have no reason not to take his word for this because this guy has been literally through hell several times and come out the other end. I'll take his word for it. Ukraine is probably the best fighting force in Europe right now, if not even the American military in some sense. I'm not saying as far as capabilities go, but as far as like structure, training, leadership, that sort of thing. You know, they obviously don't have the capabilities of a B-2 stealth bomber, obviously. But like at the same time, you get what I'm saying though. It's the people that are making the army, not the hardware. So as far as that goes, yeah,
Experience can't be bought.
yeah, these guys are way above the American military right now. Let me just put that in the Odyssey chat right here. So, how to put it? Like you're talking about with Zaluzhny, the leadership it seems like in Ukraine is preparing for what 40K people would term as the long war. No, I'm serious. This is where it's at right
Yeah.
now. Where and I was kind of curious, decade ago or so, when all this shit popped off in 2015, 2016. Where's this going to go? And with the population demographics slumping now, as we're seeing in a lot of the world, is that going to bring peace? Is that going to bring poverty? Is it going to bring war? We're kind of looking at the point right now where the decision's already been made by some people. It's like, well, it's going to be strife. And with the way the West is not reacting in this case to the war in Ukraine, it's going to be a very painful transition towards that age of strife. And you have people like Zaluzhny saying this is going to be a long-term war, and Prokopenko saying, well, we're having to adapt our army, his core, to new standards. And then I haven't got any word from Beletsky yet about what he's doing, but I imagine him and Prokopenko probably swap notes sometimes. I would hope. But anyway.
Oh, he did another interview recently.
Beletsky?
He doubled down on his nationalism.
Oh, good.
So it was good.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. I need to read that one. But anyway, point is though, guys, is that this war isn't going to end though, and what we're seeing we have in the Azov section here, how some of these people train up for life now. It's a lifestyle, it's a collective identity, and it's going to be about self-sacrifice and responsibility and duty and loyalty and all, and a switch in ethos. So to kind of also tag team that corruption thing again, it's like this is going to be the problem in the post-war era in Ukraine, I think, as far as like moral responsibility goes. You're going to have people saying, well, no, we have to defend and we have to regain our homeland. You even have the Azeri dictator, president, whatever you want to call him, saying, well, no, just wait 20 years, wait 25 years, you'll get your home back. Despite people on this show, I think, having more sympathy for the poor Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh and the ethnic genocide that happened because of these Turks. He's pointing over towards the Ukrainians and saying, well, no, just hold on and you'll get through this. So again, it's just politics. You know, people have different points of view, and I hear what he's saying on that though. At the same time, it's like Ukraine has to be in a position to do that though. The West has to put also itself in a position to realize these are things that are going to happen. Borders are going to change. Um, yeah, there was an article earlier about God. It was also from Medusa about Moldova and that country trying to find its like identity, right? And you know, Medusa is very left wing. Don't get me wrong, but they do good journalism. That's why I use them sometimes. But again, it comes down to their fucking morality again. Sorry, a little bit of Romanian history. The early union of Moldova and Wallachia were the two duchies after the Crimean War, blah blah blah. But eventually they got Transylvania after the Treaty of Trianon after World War One that invented the Greater Romania ethnic state. But after the Soviets reinvaded, they broke that part off Moldova from Romania, and then they split that again into two pieces where the bottom half of Moldova, or bottom third, whatever you want to say, is tossed over to Ukraine, which is not even contiguous to Ukraine, but is part of Ukraine now. So that's why they have a bridge there. But now Moldova, now that's moving towards the EU, they're trying to prop up this state and say, well, no, it's its own thing. We have to respect its borders, blah blah blah. I'm like, no. We mean again, Alex had this conversation. It's like, no, these people speak they are ethnic Romanians speaking another invented Russian language. In this case, Moldovan, which is just asinine. Um, and its history is the unity of the Greater Romanian state. At the same time, I read an article that was saying how Romania has to give money to the Moldovan state and the people there, which, you know, if they're co-ethnics, yeah, it makes sense if you want to help them out. But at the same time, the EU was leveraging these Moldovans with dual citizenship to vote in the that second election that happened with Aller and George Simeon and you know all the other Dan Nikursor, forget his name. So they can vote in both countries. So that is a body of people that can mess up the domestic elections in Romania. And now because they're pro EU there, the ones that are staying, they tilted the scale a little bit. Now about 100 or 200,000 of them voted for the Cursor Dan guy. Sorry, and take it what you will. I mean, like I'm still very critical of the social paradigm of what the EU tries to enforce, what they try to force states to become, and them trying to prop up Moldova. It's like that's a failed project to begin with, though. Like that is one of the poorest states, probably next to Kosovo, the poorest state in all the EU. People flee annually from that state because they don't want to be there. So like, what's the point? If the people don't want to be there and they want to be, and they're part of a larger ethnic body, in this case the Romanians, let them be part of Romania. I mean, fuck's sakes, you travel through Pennsylvania or any conservative part of Romania, let's say Moldavia est Romania. Moldova is Romania, right? Yeah, and I'm just like, well, that makes fucking sense. Like the hooligans get it, why don't the fucking politicians do? But anyway, anyway, I'm sorry guys, we're kind of going over the place here, but like again, it's just a whole kit and caboodle of a lot of fucking politics and conflict going on in the world right now. And I feel that taking 3 weeks off, well, we only took 2 weeks off. But I feel very much better about doing that though, and I'm able to come back with a little bit more energy and explain this with a little bit more enthusiasm and a little bit more of a fresh perspective, and a little bit more and a little bit more sense of urgency too. So I appreciate our audience coming back to us and listening to my monologue and Alex's input here for the last 30 minutes though. So thank you very much, guys. But yeah, again, do you have anything else, Alex? Because I feel like I'm taking up the mic too much here.
I don't even know where we're at right now.
Yeah, I know.
Moldova.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, yeah, I agree. It's kind of funny how a lot of these people are they even part of the EU? I don't think they are, right?
They're aspiring to become an EU member.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I assumed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how you see these staunch like Moldovan nationalists and like you check in like their X location, and it's like Frankfurt. And there's very few of them, but I did actually do a deep dive into that, and it's like, okay, so you're willing to abandon your own home country to live in something entirely, like, frankly, alien from either Romanian or Moldovan culture in Western Europe or even the United States. But God forbid Moldova gets absorbed and with the exact same ethno group, same linguistic. Well, okay, besides the whole Bolsheviks creating Moldovan language and all that shit, but basically, well, Romanian really is at the core of it. And completely uplift your economic conditions. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
No.
But I don't know. Maybe there's something we're overlooking. Maybe because they're Ziggers. Because I do know there's the Transnistrian thing that could be a roadblock in the way towards
True.
reunification.
True.
But
No,
I don't
and it
know
would be,
how
it would
big
be.
that is a factor.
Well, it is something that does come up sometimes, but it's kind of a non-issue in a weird way because I don't feel that Ukraine has had to exchange. I mean, there was a mild threat there in 2022, but since then it really hasn't been even talked about in most Ukrainian spaces, though. So the Russian presence in Transnistria is only a diplomatic inconvenience, really. And even the Romanians I talked to just kind of disregard that area because the way it was explained to me is that they never really settled beyond the Dniester River. Like Transnistria is, according to them, like beyond the Dniester, right? And I'm like, okay, well, it kind of straddles the river, but yeah, fine. And at the same time, it's like there is some acknowledgement that, yeah, if Ukraine wanted to take and absorb that, that would be fine with them, I think. And I'm like, okay, well, that's, a genuine step forward for, Eastern European politics that they're able to say, hey, just take this piece of land, it's not ours. I understand your frustration with, Balkans sometimes saying, hey, this is our land forever because it's one part of an empire we had 1,000 years ago,
Yeah,
right? Something
we
like
once
that.
had a kingdom in the 1400s for 30 years. So,
Yeah. Anyway, um, yeah, good to see you, Rawmind. I appreciate you being here. Yeah, please, again, guys, please like and share the show wherever you guys are. I still don't have a donation thing set up. Still waiting to hear back from uh, our friend from the show. I sent him a thing about 6 weeks ago. It takes a while to get there, and he's been on duty on and off for a while now. So as soon as I get word back about the care package we sent over there, I'll let you guys know. All right. Okay, I think we've taken up enough of the air time here because we got a lot of stuff to go through. All right, guys, let's just transition over into the PowerPoint here. If you guys have any questions or observations you want to comment on, I finally figured out the YouTube thing, so it is public now. So if you guys want to share the YouTube link, I'll put that in the Odyssey and Rumble chats here. I know it's a lot more accessible for a lot of people, so that is now open for the public. I had it under private for some fucking reason. Anyway, so yeah, let me do all the internet magic in the background here, and we'll get over to the PowerPoint. Oh, I'm sorry, map. We need to do the map first because we haven't talked about that in a minute. Sorry. Okay, we talked about Thailand, and my little brain checks that as like, oh, we talked about it. Okay. All right, guys. Okay, so the map of Ukraine here. As you can see, no huge movements, but there are a few things that are worth mentioning here. So we'll start with Takino here. Nothing new. The Ukrainians have managed to push a little bit more and create a little bit of a yellow zone here, which is contested in some of these areas around that village. Aside from that, that's about it. There's been some great news out of Sumy, though, out in this area between Kindrakiivka and Andriivka. Supposedly, was it 3 battalions of Russians were fucked up in the last month or so. There was a semi-pincer from this area which took over these 2 villages again, and I forgot the detachment that was here for the Russians. But according to Ukrainian sources, a good chunk of those 3 battalions in one of these regiments were basically rendered combat ineffective. So the Ukrainians took back some ground here and also south of Varachne, and they've created a lot more contested zone here. So Ukrainians are actually pushing back in the Sumy region, which is great. So this does show that Ukrainians are capable of offensive operations, again, if they have the weapons to do it. So it's good news out of Sumy there. But we start transitioning over into the weirdly, kind of weird, how to put it, not so good news, I guess. Um, Sorry, I'm not familiar with this incursion into Russia, but that's not really what I'm trying to transition into here. Anyway, so we'll go on over towards Volchansk. No, again, nothing new out of Hilboki or Lukyansky. There has been some more movement of the Russians in Vovchansk. This map doesn't reflect what I've seen, but supposedly the Russians have been trying to push further south into Vovchansk to get to the Volcha River. But most maps I've seen have not really reflected any new updates of the Russians taking more ground in that blown out village or town. Okay, so let's go towards some of the bad news here. Unfortunately, the Russians did expand a little bit more out of Milove. Again, just taking over a little bit more force line here. They're trying to push into Kotne and Ambarne right here. But again, they're far and hell away from any like majorly important areas like Veliki Burlak, which is a node here for a lot of the Ukrainian backbone in this area. Again, it's just Russians trying to create more pressure, though. The Russians have unfortunately been a little bit more successful in Kupiansk. So this is kind of a weird update. The Russians haven't done a whole lot more in their footprint here west of the Oskil River, but they had this oddly successful breakthrough in this area here. So in the last few days, they've broken through this area somehow and made a dogleg to basically start contesting Kupiansk north of there a little bit. Um, Again, this seems really odd to me. This is another one of those sort of quick speed rush or Zerga rushes that the Russians did. They found a gap, and unfortunately, they opened it up the contested area here a little bit more. It does look like Holubivka is now taken by the Russians, and they're pushing to contest Radivka. This might be an issue for the Ukrainians, though, because I imagine a lot of their supplies are probably coming from this area here, just because Kupiansk is so close to the front, they're not going to run their supply runs in that area. They're probably coming from Kharkiv and going along north of Chuihiv up through this road right here to get to and supply this area, I imagine by truck. But it would unfortunately create a dilemma for the Ukrainians to where they'd have to reconsolidate some of their positions and maybe start giving up some ground, maybe in the immediate area. I'm not sure. But again, it's also possible that the Ukrainians might have counterattacked and pinched off this leg or this segment right here too. But it does complicate the situation in Kupiansk a little bit more. So that is interesting to say the least. Nothing really new out of the Sinkovke area here. Going on south a little bit more. Didn't see anything new out of Third Assault pushing on to Radhorotka. Did see some combat footage, but I think there's a lot of drone footage from them in the last couple of weeks. The Russians are still continuing to push across the area north of Ternay here a little bit, just creating more dilemmas for the Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians did take some ground near Karpivka, which means they moved units into that area and started pushing back against the Russians. And this is where it starts getting a little bit more contested here, guys. Russians are starting to get some more success here in the severe salient here. As you can see, after them taking Belhorivka right here, they've started consolidating more ground south of there too. They're far and away from saying that they're going to start contesting the Serebryansk forest, but at the same time, a lot more of the area is starting to be contested though because of their speed runs and their Zerg rushes. Seversk is a large town for what this war has offered. It would be a hard attempt for the Russians to try to push into there, but at the same time, it is unsettling to see that the peripheral villages around Seversk are starting to be pressed a little bit more. So that's one sector there. Nothing really new out of this area here. A lot of it's basically west and south of Bakhmut. Chasiv Yar, the Russians are still pushing into Sevchenko, and a lot of the area west of Chasiv Yar is still contested. So Ukrainians are doing a good job of holding up that area. Toretsk, though, it looks like the fight might be essentially over for that area. According to this map, it looks like they're saying that 12th Brigade or Azov is still holding on to Novomaisk and Shirbenivka a little bit, which would be questionable to say the least. But it looks like a lot of the outskirts around Toretsk are being pushed forward from the Russians here, though. So they're trying to push a little bit further into the area around Konstantinivka. This would probably take the rest of the summer for them to even start pushing into the boroughs in this area. But to say the least, the Russians have been fighting Toretsk for a year. That ground has been pulverized and swapped back and forth, much to the timetables of Russia's expense, sorry. And the Ukrainians have done a good job defending that area. So, to say the least, being pushed back one village or two is not a huge deal, but it does create a strategic dilemma, and I'll get to that in a minute here. So the main concern is what's becoming the Pokrovsk salient now. Ever since it all comes down to what happened in Avdiivka, because the Republicans in Congress, though, after that happened, the Russians pushed into Akheratine and opened up this whole kit and caboodle here. And then we showed this linchpin right here on the map. And after that fell, the Russians started pushing north and west here a lot. So now essentially the Pokrov salient is, I hate to say surrounded, but is forced on three sides now. The Ukrainians are holding them pretty good around Udachne, Kotline, and Zelene. But there have been reports of the Russians and their recon sabotage groups getting into the suburbs of Pokrovsk. Do we have that footage by chance, Alex? I think I put that in the dump there.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
we have it.
Okay, so we do have the confirmed footage showing a Ukrainian team in their own truck being ambushed, unfortunately, by some Russians, though. That's what set off some bells in some of the media space here, though. But you're finally starting to see the Russians push forward into these areas here. So we're going to start seeing some highly attritional battles happening in this area, though. But at the same time, a lot of the units in that area for the Ukrainians, though, have been rotated out in quite some time, though. So they're very tired. Unfortunately, though, so it's a very difficult situation to say the least. But this will probably be the main focus of the Russians for the rest of the year. Because the administrative border for them is what they're trying to reach to in Donetsk. And if they could do that, they could go forward and say that's what they've achieved and blah, blah, blah. That's a win for them in negotiations. But it's going to take a very long time for the Russians to push through such a large area. And now that they're, again, trying to push through the urban areas, that means that they're reorienting their tactics to start contesting what's probably the largest urban area since Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, which was 2023. I'm trying to find that again, which is right here. Yeah. So we saw how intense that fight was, and the Russians were throwing tens of thousands of rounds a day to, take over that urban area. We're probably going to see something not up to that scale, but something similar in intensity for the Russians to try to take this area here. So that's unfortunately what's happening in Pokrovsk. Again, just little trickles of small advances throughout the rest of Zaporizhia. The last major thing that's a little bit of a concern, but nothing serious, is that the Russians jumped across Lohove and took over Kamyansky here, which surprised me genuinely, because it seems like such a defensible area, because you have what looks like a creek here, for the most part, kind of dumping into the Dnieper River here. And the Ukraine should have a backstop here of like drone support teams and artillery. But it looks like the Russians did push in here, and there has been reports of Ukrainians counterattacking in some capacity in this area, but not to much effect, unfortunately. So, all right, guys, that is the map for Ukraine. It has developed into a bit of a more of a questionable area in some areas here with Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, and Konstantinivka, but at the same time, nothing really, strategically important. It's just that tactically, it's gotten a little bit more complicated for the Ukrainians, though. Okay. Let me do the transition here, and then let me check on chat before we do the PowerPoint. I think we're all good. Okay. And let me just check on entropy here. Yeah, 35. And yeah. God bless entropy. Okay. Let me go over to the PowerPoint. Sorry, guys. I gotta do all this stuff in the background here also. I know. Shoot. Here we go. Okay, so we're covering the last 3 weeks, guys. I managed to compress it down with some AI help. Sorry, let me recover my voice a little bit. Okay, so we'll start off with the peripheral conflicts that are something we do need to track. So we'll start off with Israel here. So yeah, what's been going on over there is that the ethnic group here, which is I forgot the name of them. The Druze. Sorry, the Druze are being defended by the Jews. It sounded better in my head, but anyway. There's been some push against them by the local Bedouin in that area in Syria. I thought the Bedouins lived in Africa, but yeah. Syria has some Bedouin communities that have been trying to fight against the Jews in that area. It's created some rather graphic footage of basic ethnic cleansing, and don't think we have any of them the footage though, just because it doesn't really serve any informational purpose other than just graphic, violent porn, you know.
I put it in there for
For
those are the
reference.
ones where they're just on their knees getting mass executed.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I put that in there because you put it in there. So
Okay, okay.
I
Well,
was like, okay,
we'll come to that if if there's
yeah,
yeah
we only need to play like one,
yeah
and I think
yeah
that'll be
yeah
enough.
yeah
Yeah,
yeah yeah that'll be
just to
enough.
document it.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, what's going on in Israel, guys? The last 3 weeks, there's been a ceasefire in southern Syria after these killings. The three-phase ceasefire agreement was reached on July 18th between the Druze and Bedouin factions and Israel and Syria. Supposedly, there's going to be a transitional government in the first phase where forces are deployed to separate the warring factions. Humanitarian aid and infrastructure repair is supposed to go in after that. And the third and final phase is the restoration of state institutions and the reintegration of the Suwai. Goodness, I'm really bad at these names sometimes. Suwayadawi structures. Again, those institutional structures in this area here, which is that big town in the middle. The Israelis, of course, cannot seem to keep their hands off Syria. They conducted over 160 airstrikes since July 15th, including hits on the Syrian Ministry of Defense and Presidential Palace in Damascus, tanks and bases and personnel in Dara, Suwaida, and Rif Dimashq. Their objective was to create a demilitarized zone and protect the Druze population from the Bedouins, it sounds like. Um, yeah, I forgot the significance of the Druze, but they have an interesting religion because it's an amalgamation of Hellenic, Christian, Islamic, some Zoroastrian, and yeah, it kind of creates a really odd mix of religions into a very unique worldview, which is why they're persecuted by the Arab Syrians. And there's about 1 million of them or so. You know, not a small population, but nothing huge. Um, but yeah, anyway, so they're seen as apostates basically, which is why the Bedouins are going after them. But at the same time, Netanyahu and his Ministry of Defense, Katz, declared ongoing commitment to to demilitarization idea build up in the Golan region because that's now theirs. And Marco Rubio has expressed concern and pressured Israel to halt the airstrikes out of the fragile peace that's being trying to be built up there. And the intracommunal violence began on July 13th after a Druze man was beaten in Dara, and it basically escalated across Suwaida. Dozens of civilians were kidnapped, and over 30 people were killed and 30 injured on July 13th alone. The Syrian MOD accused of abuses, which included looting and forced shavings of Druze religious mustaches. Um, yeah, so it hasn't been a really stable. Like it's just Syria being Syria at this point. It's pretty normal. Um, on top of this, though, China and Iran have been aligning closer because Russia hasn't been exactly the best ally to Iran after the war, what they're calling the 12-day war now. So it seems like China's going to be filling the gap with what Russia should have been trying to do. Beijing confirmed it doesn't want Russia to lose in Ukraine, fearing. I'm sorry. Iran. Okay, my bad. I had that from another piece of note there. Iran shifts to PRC for weapons and SAMs, possibly J-10 fighters after what Pakistan did against the Indians. After its disappointment with Russia on aid during the Israeli-Iran war, and they're still waiting on those Sukhoi 35s to be delivered. Um, Signs of growing PRC-Iran military alignment post-ceasefire. And the PRC origin components are increasingly found on Ukrainian battlefields, which is undermining China's neutrality claim anymore, because it seems like they're also sending over chemicals and other things that help rocket fuel be developed domestically in Iran. So they're definitely getting their hands in a lot of little things that are definitely contesting Western interests. Anyway, so that's a bit what's going on in Israel and a lot of the Far East there. This kind of goes over a lot of points we already talked about, though. We talked about the Kaja Kallas talking to China's foreign minister Yang Wi that China is not interested in seeing Russia lose. Long story short, because they want Western attention to be stuck in Europe, not in the Southeast Asian region. A strategic risk of Russian defeat for China, it would mean a political risk for them and a collapse possibly of Russia. And would also reinforce a global narrative, which would mean that Western influence and credibility would get a boost, and it would counter Beijing's goals of trying to stretch out Western interests along a lot of other conflicts going on in the world. So over to Africa just really quick here, guys, before we get to Ukraine. The U.S. and West Africa had a strategic engagement in the White House. Trump hosted a 3-day summit with the leaders of Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mauritania, and Senegal. This is also because China has been trying to move into a port agreement with Gabon, and Guinea-Bissau has, I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong, has also been aligning itself with Russia. In particular, they've strengthened ties with Russia since its post-2023 coup attempt. Russia's trained up 5,000 troops there, but they also have defense partnerships with Ukraine and the U.S. The U.S. has countered the influence of China and Russia through joint military training, radar facility construction, and maritime patrol vessel donations to these areas here. It's also worth noting that Mauritania borders Mali right here. I know it's grayed out, though you really can't see it that well. But Mali being probably the most important of the 3 Sahel nation states that are the coup states, basically. Again, it's a lot of empty area here, but most of it also has a lot of terrorists that go between Mauritania and Mali, mainly the Tuaregs and some ISIS factions, and they're really, really fucking up the Malian army. Mali is on a razor's edge, really, when it comes to like political stability and security in that area. Russians haven't really done too well against a lot of the terrorists in this area, especially the north part of it. And Mauritania, being on the border of Mali, doesn't want that happening, obviously, though. So they're looking towards the West in this case to be a partner in defense to push back against these in case anything happens, and also to defend their own border. But there's a lot of empty space there, obviously. Quick note on the Democratic Republic of the Congo. There was a tenuous agreement, but now seems like violence has flashed again. It's going up in eastern Congo, so nothing really new. But the peace process is under threat. Qatari and U.S. diplomatic tracks are diverging. Qatari-led talks. There was a 5th round of talks scheduled this week, but stalled over irreconcilable demands. The U.S. brokered peace between Rwanda and DRC. Requires both sides to stop supporting armed groups and cease hostile actions, but both sides have not done that. So, give it to black people to lie about a thing, but not actually follow through. So, anyway, South Kivu is basically looking to become another major conflict again, because they need to catch a breather, sounds like. So, anyway, over to Ukraine, guys. We're going to do, again, a clockwise rounding out of the fronts here in Ukraine. Starting off with the border regions, starting with Sumy. Ukrainian brigade reported an increase in Russian sabotage and recon groups behind the front. Russian SRGs receive a resupply from drones, ammo, and food, and the SRGs are used as disposable assault groups to interdict Ukrainian logistics. Um, and furthermore, on Sumy Oblast, Ukrainian counterattacks at Sumy reportedly threatened to encircle Russian elements near Andriivka and Oleksivka, which they did. And yes, that's why I added that note for the 3 Russian battalions. Ukrainian sabotage and critical rear disruption. There was also in a. Oh, sorry, let me read this a little bit more because what's also being included, because I'm having to aggregate all these notes. I'm putting in what happens deeper in Russia, also with the border regions though, because there's just so little news coming sometimes out of Sumy. I put in what also happens in Russia sometimes related to the war and sabotage and partisan stuff. In this section, I used to include that more in the rear area stuff, but the way the Institute for the Study of War has been aggregating their information on that, it's much more about humanitarian disaster, like the child abductions of Ukrainian children into Russia, the appropriation of lands, that property that were Ukrainian, and stuff like that, though. So it's much more humanitarian, not so kinetic or partisan. So I'm trying to put that into the border section here. Yeah, so just let me get to the bottom here, though. There was a Ukrainian Guler unit that has managed to sabotage and burn down a Sukhoi 27, at a Russian airbase at the Aramar airfield in Krasnodar Krai. So here's that footage. Yeah, good stuff there. Yeah, so this is just coming off the back of what also we saw about 2 months ago in England of some sabotage going on a English airbase too. Um, this isn't the first time we've seen partisans, attack grounded Russian aircraft, but yeah, this is interesting to see it still happening, especially in Krasnodar Krai, which isn't too far away from Ukraine. I would think that security would be beefed up a little bit more in the peripheral areas around the war zone, but obviously not. There was some drone strikes and some other stuff going on with gas, and there was a railway that was hit by some Ukrainian drones, disrupting Russian logistics. Also, local defense-related factories in Petrov, Kirov, and Erman in Russia too. So just fucking up a little bit of the EW stuff on the side of the Russians, and some war production stuff related to artillery and stuff like that too. Anyway. All right, going over to Kharkiv, some stuff also included here is mentioning the small unit assaults and recon. Kind of went into that a little bit though, but the specifics include that Russians are using 2 to 3 man recon teams and 5 to 7 man assault groups to probe Ukrainian defenses, particularly around Volchansk, Milove, and Ambarne. There's also been assaults are frequent in Kozacha, Lopan, and shift across sectors to find vulnerabilities as Russians is probing. It's been increased assault frequency because of the height of summer right now. On July 6th and 7th, between 19 and 24 assaults, but at the end of June, it's about 5 to 7 assaults per day. And night tactics concealment include the Russians still using anti-thermal imaging ponchos to avoid drone detection during nighttime infantry raids, about 1 to 2 troops at a time. So it seems like sniper groups, an observer and a shooter sort of thing. So that's what it seems like to me, though. Drone warfare and electronic innovations in this area. Russians are using fiber optic drones that can go up to 30 kilometers behind their lines, and is also expected to have upgrades eventually up to 50 kilometers of cable length, and drones are carrying a payload of about 8 to 10 kilograms, which is about 16 to 20 pounds of explosive, which is quite a lot, really. Ukraine's counter-drone defense in this area includes the Ukrainian drone operators maintain control of the Vovchansk aggregate plant and repel Nelly infantry advances, and aerial recon and kill zones are monitored across about a 5-kilometer defensive depth in that area. Forces are still using motorcycle and buggy tactics, and they're still attempting to cross the Volcha River, but to no success. All right, over to Luhansk, guys. Severe sector assaults. The Ukrainian group in that area reported repelling a mass motorized assault of up to 80 vehicles near Seversk, Horivka, Serebryanka, and Vimka. Sorry. A Ukrainian drone unit near Belhorivka repelled a mechanized Russian assault, destroying 2 tanks, an armored tank, which is probably a turtle tank, and a civilian vehicle. We're seeing increased reports of Russians going back to massed armored assaults again. So it's interesting because we were so used to the last few months of them relying strictly on blitz assaults, infantry foot assaults, and that sort of thing. But now it's more of a mixed bag. I'm gonna believe for right now that they're gonna start moving towards mechanized assaults, just because that's gonna force the Ukrainians to have to readapt to old tactics and start figuring out how to do that again, I guess. That's just what we've seen with the Russians, though. Also with the missiles. I also want to talk about that, but we'll get to that in the headlines, though. So again, increase in armored assaults. We'll probably see that trend up here a little bit more, though, in the near future. Drone unmanned systems warfare in this area. In the Kupiansk sector, Russian forces conduct around-the-clock assaults using glide bombs and infantry. They often include lone soldiers and 1 to 2 man infiltration teams. And the countermeasures for the Ukrainians in this area, Ukraine used FPV drones and for the first time unmanned ground vehicles to assault positions near Barova, reportedly forcing Russian troops to surrender. I think we have that in the stack too. Russian unmanned ground vehicle use. Russians also employ UGVs for remote mining, logistics, and evacuations in gray zones near Kupiansk. So around the rest of the sectors here, guys, kind of breaking it down a little bit. Northern flank activity. The Russians have intensified near Molove, which is north of Kupiansk, starting July 7th with incursions across the international border backed by artillery and drones. There is an encirclement concern with some of these regions. A Ukrainian drone regimental commander reported Russia intends to expand its bridgehead west of the Oskil River, bypass Kupiansk from the north, and cut off Ukrainian ground line communications from that area. And Russian-built blogger expressed skepticism, however, of this happening now. He denies Russian forces have entered Marove or Sobolivka and complains about the Russian military command is overstaying progress near Kupiansk. So we're just going off what is usually visually confirmed in a lot of these maps, but that is what is being shown, though, too. So it's likely that they may also just been pushed back, though, too, hopefully. We'll see that, hopefully, by next week, if that happens. But moving over to Donetsk, guys, got a couple pages for Donetsk because this is the main thrust for the Russians. Just to also kind of highlight here, this is the border area for the Donetsk Oblast. The Russians have been trying to push the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, but again, their main goal is to take the rest of Donetsk, though. I think a lot of the other peripheral conflicts around Kupiansk, Vovchansk, and over in Zaporizhzhia also is just kind of trying to stretch out the Ukrainian defense there a little bit. Their main effort is really still in this area and still grinding very slowly. Tactics and assault patterns in this area, though, is that Russian forces continue highly attritional infantry-led assaults and are trying to reach the T-0504 highway to Konstantinivka. Assault groups are often structured in 3-man fire teams, 1 armored soldier, 1 armored carrier, and 1 rear follower. So it looks like 2 armed guys and 1 mule, essentially. These units employ summer foliage for concealment, including anti-drone thermal cloaks and ambush tactics on Ukraine ground line communications. And drones are used to disrupt logistics, conduct ambushes, and direct guided bomb strikes. It has also been confirmed that Russians have about 100,000 personnel concentrated in this sector alone. Quality Force, however, shows that Russian forces include both professional units and poorly equipped infantry used to absorb Ukrainian fire, and the Russian elite units like the 98th VDV have been degraded due to heavy rotation and reliance on penal recruits. The reports indicate scooters now supplement motorcycles in assault operations. and in the Novopolivka axis, which is this one right here. Russian maneuver and logistics. Russians are walking about 10 to 15 kilometers to the front lines in this area due to Ukrainian drone dominance. And assault groups are led by motorized rifle units using ATVs, IFVs, and APCs, and occasionally tanks. And it's been reported that the Russian forces in this area are degraded and mainly poor. So over in the chest, I'm sorry, Novopolivka might have been this area. I apologize. In the Chesiv Yar sector here, guys, just kind of showing you a little bit more of a highlight of what ISW is showing in this area here. Tactical observations for this area is that the Russian forces attack, again, with small infantry teams. They use pipes, drainage sewers, and windbreaks to evade Ukrainian drones, so anything that can give them cover, not just concealment. And 5,000 Russian casualties were reportedly sustained in Chasiv Yar over the past year alone. In the Tourette's direction, there's stalemate conditions, which is due to a lot of the good units there, and the Azov Corps, basically. Russian forces are unable to seize Tourette's nearly after a year of fighting, and Russian emphasis on now flanking maneuvers to envelop Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk are being done rather than frontal assaults. Supporting operations are being done by the VKS, which is the Russian Air Force, including fielding upgraded glide bombs with enhanced noise immunity, which is what their meaning is the static that Ukrainian EW can put out against Russian hardware. And accuracy to support ground advances. In the Seversk salient, force depletion and tactical shift, recurring NCOs report that Russian offensive intensity is declining due to destruction of better trained Russian forces. And again, the Russians are relying 2 to 6 man infantry groups. And it is also being reported in the Torsk and Novopatsky areas that Russian sabotage groups attempt to raise flags on town outskirts to fabricate control. And Russian units are often falsely claimed to have seized entire settlements to please higher command. We're seeing a lot of maps from the Russian info space making wild claims about just huge successes. The maps I see of the Pokrovsk salient are way more aggressive in the red that is shown on the map versus what is being shown to have visually been confirmed to have been taken. So that is something worth noting, guys, because again, you're also part of the war. Like you might not be, well, what I would tell any MAGA person, you might not be interested in the war, but they are very much interested in you. Anyone that can be discontented to also push back against any support for Ukraine is a win for a Russian. So, okay, last sector here, guys. In Zaporizhzhia, Russia assaults and force composition in this area during an attack. Ukrainian forces repelled a platoon-sized mechanized assault near Novopokrovka, which included 1 tank, 3 IVs, and 4 buggies. Which is, again, we're seeing another emergence of Russians trying to mix up armored elements with soft-skinned vehicles. Deputy battalion commander for Ukraine reported that a Russian assault group usually consists of 3 to 4 soldiers and often lightly equipped, but they do occasionally use motorcycles and buggies in these platoon-sized infantry assaults. I think there was even a company-sized assault in the Seversk area, which was about 80 vehicles or so. Yeah, pretty large. And that, again, we're used to seeing these small little incremental gains, at most squad size sort of assaults by the Russians. But it seems like they're trying to really hammer home with mass assaults again. So I think my guess for that is that the Russians probably think that Ukraine has stretched out their drone units so much that having such mass in one area can't be responded to adequately by how few drone teams there are in some areas. There's just too many targets for them. It would just be they couldn't saturate enough of the targets with FPV drones to stop an assault. So again, the Russians would be willing to take the casualties, lose 1 or 2 tanks, IFVs or buggies or whatever. But as long as they take ground, they consider it a win. So that's why we're probably going to start seeing an increase in these sort of attacks. The Russians are trying to push harder in some areas with these things, and they've been husbanding these resources for a few months now. So they got a mild stockpiles, probably in the near rear areas, to go and do this sort of assault with. Force morale and quality in this area. Ukrainian sources report false battlefield progress reports from the Russians in Zaporizhzhia to higher command again. And a new Russian motorized rifle regiment formed in Chechnya recently arrived, but frequent desertions have been observed among personnel. So even the Chechens are not wanting to show up for the fight because it's interesting because we do know that even on some, I think it was, yeah, I do have a video in the Azov section. Sorry, it kind of goes with this a little bit. The Russian, sorry, the Freedom of Russia Legion did a raid 30 kilometers into Zaporizhia, like just a huge penetration, and they ended up putting an IED on a Chechen commander's vehicle and detonating it. I think they killed a colonel, if I remember right. Anyway, so that kind of confirms what they're trying to do in that area. They're trying to demoralize and, or at least damage the backstop troops in that area in Zaporizhia, because that is still a strategic area for Ukraine to commit to some sort of offensive, though. So if they can increase the desertion rate for the Russians and have them leave their units, create more gaps in their line, if there is ever an opportunity, the Ukrainians might try it in that area again, but they have to set the conditions for that first. So by going after the Chechens, killing the backstop troops, the Russians will leave on their own. But when the Chechens have to backstop other Chechens, they're not so willing to go and maybe do what they do against Russians. So that's why we're seeing reports like this, though, happen when the Chechens send a rifle regiment out. The desertions will happen because Chechens won't kill other Chechens if they have to, or if they can. Sorry. Anyway, operational intent: Russian forces aim to push towards the Mariupol highway and ultimately seize Orkiv, Kamyansky, and I'm not even going to try to enunciate that. I apologize. Ukrainian commanders assess that the current assault intensity is the highest in Zaporizhia since the 2022 invasion. Along the Dnipro River and Kherson sector, guys, Russian drone activity has continued. There was one video of the Russians getting very much more blatant in their targeting of civilians in the Kherson area. There have been a few videos I've seen of Ukrainians complaining how isolated Kherson has been now because the Russians are just dropping grenades and FPVing any soft-skin vehicle they can. This is, again, just to kind of force a fait accompli upon the consciousness of Ukrainians still living in Kherson. They're just trying to terrorize them to leave that area, so it just seems like they could walk in, basically. Aside from the Russians just doing what they usually do in targeting civilian areas, but that's probably the goal for them in that area. And lastly, on July 11th, the Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov met with the VDV and Dnieper Grouping Commander Colonel General Mikhail Teplinsky at a command post in occupied Kherson region, signaling high-level focus on that axis. All right, going over towards. Let me just check on chat here a little bit before I push on to the headlines here, guys. Okay, looks like YouTube. Okay, well, YouTube's YouTube. I'm not really trying to stake anything there, but yeah, if you guys have any questions or oh goodness, are you guys not seeing that? Okay, never mind. I'm sorry. The Odyssey is weird. It doesn't catch up if I'm not having on my screen here. So anyway, looks like everyone's just kind of enjoying the show. So we'll just go on to the headlines here, guys. If you have any questions or observation, guys, please put it out there. Okay. So we'll start off with the battlefield situation in Ukraine here, guys. I have a map here, which is pretty cool from ISW. The light pink shows the map as it was prior to January 2nd, and everything in the darker red is from January 2nd to July 14th. So as you can see, it's pretty modest gains for the most part, though. But needless to say, a lot of it is still pretty difficult for the Ukrainians here, though. The Russians have pushed and tried to develop a little more Pokrovsk. Konstantinivka is also threatened from mainly its southern and southeastern axis, and the Russians just continue to try to push towards Izium, as you can see here. Russian offensive prioritization. Pokrovsk push intensifies. The Russian forces concentrate their offensive efforts towards Pokrovsk, deprioritizing attacks on Konstantinivka, so they shifted their primary effort from here towards Pokrovsk, which is interesting for me because it might be the easier target. How to put it? For me, if I was a Russian commander or a high-level decision maker, my main concern would be the fortress belt, right? And if I could start like chipping away at these 4 cities here, That would be my primary concern, because if I could take this, that means the rest of the Donetsk Oblast would be basically open for a slow but grinding takeover. But looking at Pokrovsk, though, maybe it's just, again, it's another one of those political decisions that has such a name in the public's mind that they're just wanting to take it now. Maybe, or it might be just easier to. I don't know. Because the defenses around Konstantinivka have been constantly built since 2014. Um, so that might be the genuine decision on that, though. But that's kind of an interesting decision by the Russians, though. Anyway, yeah. So the Ukraine counterattacks and drone defense are holding the line in this area, and in a lot of Ukraine. Ukraine regained ground near Sumy, stabilized the Kupiansk and severe sectors for the most part, and conducted tactical counterattacks to reclaim high ground to disrupt Russian consolidation. Ukraine's drone units maintain again about a 20 kilometer buffer zone in Kharkiv and Donetsk, and the FPV drones and Lancet countermeasures continue to inflict heavy equipment attrition on Russian supply columns and infantry movements. Rate of advance and casualties, which is a grim exchange with the Russians, though. Russia advanced roughly about 50 square kilometers a day throughout July, but only at a cost of massive personnel losses. It is estimated that Russia has now lost 900,000 to 1.3 million Russian casualties, including up to 350,000 KIAs, which indicate about a 0.038 square kilometer gained per KIA. So they're gaining a few hundredths of a square kilometer for every Russian death. That's not even including the wounded. Yeah, despite limited geographic progress, strategic cost efficiency remains abysmal, raising questions about long-term sustainability for the Russians to continue the strategy. But politically, it seems viable for them. Their strategic objectives, again, is to for the Dnipro and other buffer zones. Russian objectives remain: one, to capture the rest of Donetsk Oblast; two, to gain access routes towards Dnipro; and three, to create buffer zones north of Kharkiv. Yeah, so that was an interesting. I love showing numbers to you guys. Looks like most estimates are finally catching up to the 350,000 mark. Because we did talk a few months ago that there were about 300,000 death certificates requested through the Russian Department for Veteran Benefits. I forgot the name of it, but yeah, it seems like those estimates now and most Western sources are catching up, or even going beyond that now too. So that's interesting. Last page, I think, for the battlefield updates. The frontline developments sector by sector. Pokrovsk, which is again the main axis of attack, with ongoing attempts to breach Ukrainian lines west of Avdiivka. In Kupiansk, Seversk, and Liman, there is a dynamic battle with Ukrainian interdiction limiting Russian consolidation in a lot of those sectors. In Kharkiv, Russia's consolidating gains, and they're also attempting to fortify the gray zone corridor of 10 to 20 kilometers deep. And in Zaporozhye and Robotny, there's static fighting with Russia attempting to retake lost ground from the 2023 Ukrainian advances. Operational tactics, we're seeing still heavily reliant on infantry wave tactics, but also again moving towards some armored assaults too. Putin's theory of victory is still pushing forward, but nothing really is changing strategically in that capacity. Russia's strategy assumes Ukrainian mobilization limits and Western political cycles will offer Russia an upper hand by 2026 unless reversed. The conclusion from all this, though, in the last month is that the war of endurance just is continuing to deepen. Russia's offensive actions in late July highlighted a strategic shift towards slow envelopment rather than deep breakthroughs, reflecting Moscow's effort to grind down Ukrainian lines while minimizing armor losses. Ukraine's use of drones, tactical counterattacks, and terrain defense is blunting the Russian tempo, but high Russian manpower reserves ensure a continued assault across multiple fronts. The war trajectory now hinges on whether Ukraine can sustain its defense and regain initiative, and whether the West can outlast Putin's gamble on attrition. Trump almost doing a 180, at least rhetorically, is what sounds like, is also in Ukraine's favor. He said he doesn't want to talk to Putin anymore very recently, which is a plus. But what really needs to happen is just continuous support militarily through material support, financial support for the state, and a boost of morale, really. The Ukrainians need a little bit, how to put it, they're tired. obviously. I want to see some more support come from the West. Also rhetorically, that always does help. But based off a lot of the stuff, we'll talk about that a little bit here with the corruption case here. But the domestic politics are certainly something that the domestic population still in Ukraine is front and center of their minds. They're they're just used to living in this sort of wartime conditions, and what happens in Kyiv is seemingly more important than what happens on the front. Just above that is the drones. So try to do a segue there. So earlier this morning, I tried asking for a map of the latest Russian drones, and the reason why I asked for that though is because for the last 3 months really, since May, we saw this gradual increase to a peak on second-ish week of July, where Russia was sending over 700 drones along with a mixture of missiles, and that was just huge. Where Russia can start sending close to 1,000 drones a night, or at least a few thousand over the course of a couple weeks. That is certainly a huge increase from the usual tempo of what we've been seeing. So what we're seeing now is also a decline on the back end of that, though. And it's been pretty interesting just to see the data points here because you see, them trying to keep it up a little bit. But, there's some nights where it's just less than 50. It's just drones. But then they also mix it up with missiles. But again, since the early part of July, we're seeing this decrease, though. So what I did see, but I wasn't able to save as a file, is that when the Russians have these high saturation drone attacks, they'll attack from several vectors and densely pack their drones in with their missile strikes, it seems like, though. But when we have this contraction of the number of drones, there'll be fewer vectors, but they'll be much more concentrated in a few key areas, though. So again, it's really more of a reliance on overwhelming the defenses in certain sectors if they select them for targeting. So that's what's interesting to me, at least, though, is that we're not seeing just the entire front being saturated with 200 drones and about, what would that be, 20 missiles, night or two ago. But we're seeing them just kind of pack it all into, say, the Sumy Oblast and the Chernihiv Oblast. Maybe go into Kyiv or something like that. So that seems to be the tactics they're using. So the defenses around those areas have to be up on their toes still. So it's not just a few drones anywhere else. Yeah. So as far as the Russian drone programs go, the Russians have been trying to centralize and scale up this Rubicon program, which has had actually some effect in Ukraine. So I'll talk about that a little bit here. Russia's Ministry of Defense oversees the Rubicon Center for Advanced Unmanned Technologies, which centralizes drone innovation, training, analytics, and combat deployment. They were reported in Chasiv Yar not too long ago, too, so they've had some effect in that area from what the Ukraine's been reporting. Rubicon is structured into 4 components: development of unmanned robotic systems, instructor training, analytics, and frontline combat units. Rubicon units have been deployed from Kursk to Donetsk axes, including critical front lines like Konstantinivka, where Ukraine forces report a sharp uptick in drone sophistication and coordination. Russia's building 5 unmanned system detachments, one for each of its operational groupings in Ukraine. The tactical impact, we talked about a lot about the fiber optic drones, so we'll get into that again. But we talked a little bit more of the graph here, guys. This does mean, okay, well, I was saying earlier, the largest drone and missile strikes of the war so far have happened in the last month. I keep saying that, though, because in May it was the same thing. In June it was the same thing, too. But then in July we're saying the same thing. So it just keeps going up. But now we're seeing what looks like a downtrend now, at least for now. On July 8th and 9th, Russia launched 741 drones and missiles. Then from July 9th to 10th, close to 400. Then 11th to 12th, about 600. Then on the night of the 15th to 16th, 18th to the 19th, and 25th to 26th, each strike exceeded 500 total projectiles. A huge number of aerial targets. These operations mark a shift towards saturation-style air assault designed to test and overwhelm Ukraine's air defense grid. The new strike tactics and civilian impact. Russia is increasingly focusing its strike packages on 1 or 2 major cities per night to concentrate damage and bypass distributed defenses, though. Multi-vector and multi-attitude launch tactics make interception more difficult. So this basically means, again, from different directions and different heights for certain defenses, though. Because the Ukrainians were used to using mobile fire groups, whether it's goodness, I forgot the name of that dual 30 millimeter they call it. But yeah, they were used to shooting down drones like Sahid drones for the most part because they're usually low flying though. But the Russians have since increased the how to put it, the flight ceiling for the Sahid drones. It sounds like to where ground fire from those teams is much more ineffectual. So that has led to further penetration in some sectors for these drones. But on a review I did see about drone defenses though, as I was mentioning earlier, a long time ago, over I think it was like close. They said 40, 40 or 100. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact number, but the Gepard German anti-air defense flak tank, basically. The Ukrainians overwhelmingly love those things. It's cheap. It's well, the ammunition's cheap. It's very easy. It's sophisticated, and it's very good at shooting down slow flying drones. So they need more of those. So we're probably going to see a shift in the European defense industry to start building more of these sort of flak tanks, um, which is old, I would say late Cold War technology, really. But in the case of this current era, that they're definitely finding a second life again. So drones continued. We talked about the production surge and for the Russians and the fall 2025 projections. Let's get a little bit into that though. Ukraine and Western analysts warn that Russia has increased the heat production sevenfold, now capable of producing hundreds weekly. Russia's producing PRC-linked lines to scale to Garan 2, which is a Sahid 136 analog. Analysts project that Russia may launch 1,000 to 2,000 drones in a single night by fall if growth continues. There's been recently Russian propaganda putting out footage of them expanding the Alabuga Special Economic Zone drone factory. That sounds like they're building a second factory and trying to recruit children actually to start building some of these drones. It sounds a little odd that they do that, but according to further reading I've been able to decipher through a lot of this, is that the Russians are trying to enculture a an environment of drone proficiency in a lot of their youth. So if the Russians at a young age can start building these drones and start training on these drones at a very young age, they feel that they'll just mature over time with this sort of sophistication and understanding of this technology, giving them an edge in future conflict, though. So, Ukraine defensive successes. Most nights, most drones were shot down. On the July 8th to 9th, 718 of 741 drones were shot down or suppressed. And EW systems neutralize hundreds of decoys and seeds nightly, which is an increase in efficacy of those systems. Sort of soft kill systems is what they're called. There's also a new thing called a Clean Sky drone interceptor program over Kyiv, downed over 50 drones during the July 11th and 12th strike. I think these are the reusable, like, anti-kamikaze drones. I think we saw some footage of that in our chat, though, but I don't know if we have it in the stack or not. But yeah, just continuing innovation by the Ukrainians to, like, defend themselves. Ukraine deep strikes on the Russian defense industrial base. They hit key targets in Tula and Smolensk Oblast, including chemical plants and rocket component facilities. And the Russian MOD exaggerations of Moscow and St. Petersburg hits likely intends to stir public sentiment or shape public perception, trying to overemphasize the hits that Ukrainians do sometimes penetrate into Russian territory, just to kind of still motivate the Russian population, though, because I think at this point they're also feeling a little bit apathetic about how long the war's been going on. But again, the strategic objective for the Russians is to degrade morale and the Ukrainian energy grid. Anything you want to add, Alex?
Jupiter 5 says they'll put kids in drones next. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a fucking nerd. In the Total War Warhammer fan, God, I'm gonna get nerdy here, and you guys. There is an orc catapult that puts a grot in a flyable projectile. So that just to me seems like very Russian to me. Anyway, I don't know why that popped in my head.
An orc, you say?
Well, it's a grot. It's a small version of an orc, but yeah, it's lesser than a goblin. But yeah. Anyway, but yes, an orc in a projectile. So yes, that's what popped in my head because I'm way too deep into this. Anyway.
Yeah, actually, I have something to add to that.
Sure.
I found out, I'm not going to say where, but in our local area, there are technical colleges offering courses now on drone manufacturing and soldering, programming,
Okay.
and doing CAD work on building drone frames and that kind of stuff. So I'm noticing, I'm like, I wonder if that's America kind of. I'm not saying these are private institutions. I'm saying these are public colleges.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, we need people with these skill sets because that's going to be a very important thing for our military.
Oh yeah, totally.
But no.
I wish I was just good at AutoCAD. I was absolutely terrible when I tried doing it. I just wish you know who I'm talking about. I just wish there were some people we knew that were just get into that because that sounds like such a lot. Sounds like a lot of money, a lot of good money too. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. All right. Anyway, just to kind of briefly go over negotiation, guys. I don't want to spend too much on this, just because it's been. I don't know. I almost want to hand wave this off, but it's just been kind of a big circle jerk, really. There was another round of negotiations happening while we were on break a little bit. Um, frustration and divergence. Marco Rubio met with Sergei Lavrov on July 10th, expressing U.S. frustration with Russia's lack of progress towards ending the war. Rubio conveyed President Trump's dissatisfaction with Moscow's inflexibility and pushed for a roadmap for a political solution, but that hasn't happened. Russia's still pushing for Ukrainian regime change, full demilitarization, and keeps pushing this little rhetoric about the realities on the ground, which is, again, a euphemism for Russia's sort of battlefield successes, or what they're calling successes. The Kremlin narrative, peace, diplomacy as diversion. Uh, Nothing really much to say. There's just been Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs emphasized bilateral cooperation with the U.S. on unrelated issues such as economic relations, to that extent of what it is, civil air traffic, just small things. And to Erdogan's credit, he's been actually pretty professional about trying to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. Um, try pushing that, but they obviously didn't get anywhere with it. But to the Turks' credit, he's been pretty good about it though. So I'll give a thumbs up for that though. But again, there's still a need for the four people to meet in the same room, which would be Erdogan, Putin, Trump, and Zelensky all in the same room to basically hammer this thing out. So the only thing we've really been seeing so far, well, from the Ukrainian side, they're putting out a few things. They said the return of all POWs and all deported children, but at the same time, the Russians are saying, well, we didn't abduct any children because there was a list of about 331 children the Ukrainians had names for. Said, hey, these are the kids. You want them back? Hand them over. They're our kids. Russia's like, we don't take kids. We only liberate them. I had to laugh because otherwise I get angry and just start smashing things. But the point is though, Russia's just again stalling for time. It sounds like, and if Trump was half the man he claims to be, he would just start arming Ukraine to the teeth and start smashing Russian skulls at this point. But not going to happen. Yeah, at a certain point, like even high-level talks have just been pushed further and further back. So no one's really believing anything is really being continued on about that, though. Yeah, so kind of getting over towards the big stuff this last week, guys. I kind of wanted to save this for the last thing before we get to the bottom of the stack stuff. So the anti-corruption law controversy. The law was passed on the 22nd, which was only 8 days ago. Ukraine's parliament passed a law subordinating the anti-corruption bodies, the NAPU and SAPU, I meant to put a no in that, to the prosecutor general. President Zelensky signed the bill on the same day. I think this was like a midnight signing sort of thing. So it was kind of like the Patriot Act, as far as Americans go, because we remember how that passed, middle of the night. Everyone hated it. But this triggered an escalating standoff between the SBU and the NABU and SBU. I'm sorry. So what was the SBU? I'm sorry. Sometimes I forget my own notes. The SBU raided the NABU offices on July 21st after NABU opened extortion investigations into an SBU personnel. Domestic backlash protests broke out on June 22nd and 23rd across major cities. Most of these were in the few dozens, sometimes up to 1,000 per city. Um, some I don't know how to put it. Some leftists were calling this like Zelensky's Maidan, which, needless to say, it really wasn't. Again, right sector did show up to, I think, the Kyiv protest on one of the days, so you know, credit to them. But at the same time, this is hardly the sort of crisis that Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying it is too. She's saying that the Ukrainians are protesting Zelensky because they want to end the war. Blah blah blah. There hasn't been any protest to stop the war. Obviously, they're protesting the government to not do the to subordinate the quote anti-corruption bodies underneath the government. We went into that at the beginning of the show. I'm not going to harp on about it again, but needless to say, from an ethics and principle standpoint, I'm very, how to put it, it's very questionable to have those sort of oversight bodies over the national government, where they can just investigate everyone from the president to the lowest trooper, right? And they're just supposedly untouchable. The weird thing about it, though too is that it's a an anti corruption bureaucracy, but also a prosecutor body too. There Some of these judges are appointed by these advisors and international bodies, but according to their own words, they're saying that they can only prosecute and recommend them to the courts. So the judicial body of the national government of Ukraine still has to process these cases, though. So in some sense, it's like, well, okay, so you're just here to say that guy's corrupt, that guy's got money, send him to court, on these charges we say that they have. Not saying that these don't exist. Obviously, Ukraine has a corruption problem, but at the same time, it's like, what are you supposed to do? Like, we're not supposed to touch you. We're not supposed to know what you're looking into. Are your motivations questionable? That's all. It's all very. It's say fake and gay, but it's not. It's very serious, obviously, but at the same time, in my own fiber, it's very questionable. I just don't. There is a corruption problem. It has to be fixed. This is an imperfect tool for a very bad problem. So I wish it was better, but this is the reality that the Ukrainians have to work with. So I guess that's what people are just going to have to put up with for now. So if you guys have thoughts on that, please let me know, because this is a very interesting topic, I think. If we had, I don't know, say we had an international body in America trying to get rid of the cartel problem, right? Because at this point, the war on drugs is an absolute failure, and we had, say, an EU and Chinese body. I don't know, I'm just making things out of the top of my head. Trying to coordinate things between Mexico and us to kill the cartels, right? But there was some success, but not enough success, and the public generally hates that, right? Would you support that because it's killing cartel guys? It's kind of helping up the drug problem in America. I don't know. I'm trying to come up with some sort of equivalent, right? But it's an imperfect fit. So anyway. As nationalists, like, it should be done by the state, for the people, right? But at the same time, sometimes the problem's got to be acknowledged that they're also international. So anyway, it's just a weird thing. Talked about the domestic backlash, Zelensky's justification and reversal attempt. He claimed the law would protect Nabu and Sapu from Russian infiltration. He said that the law was aimed at reinstating independence and addressing public concerns with the departments. I'm sorry, yeah, this is the reversal, sorry. He submitted this draft law, hasn't been signed yet. This would limit the general prosecutor's power over SAPU. It would reinforce SAPU and NABU case of autonomy and their disciplinary measures. This is also the interesting thing. The people involved in those offices would have to be they would be imposed with polygraph and security requirements, travel restrictions, and internal integrity reforms for the NABU staff. So there is some stuff going on, and they would have to be forced to take truth tests essentially every 2 years to be in these offices, though. So it's kind of interesting caveat to this whole thing too, is that they haven't given up the issue, they haven't totally abandoned it, but they're also just like, okay, well, maybe we need to be at a halfway point somewhere, because I think the general public does understand that these offices are their efficacy is very low. So at the same time, there has to be an integrity and accountability from the state for these international bodies. This is what's happening too. So I don't know. I'll leave it to the audience to make up what they will with that. Russian propaganda and manipulation. We talked about that a little bit. Um, the narrative objectives of the Russians is that they've been trying to undermine Ukrainian legitimacy, discourage U.S. and EU military support, which did have some effect. Nothing stopped, but it certainly raised a few eyebrows. So mistrust between Ukraine and its allies, because corruption is corruption, and bolstered Putin's theory of victory, which is again outlasting Western resolve and assistance. But again, guys, everything you hear about this sort of thing, everyone that tells you something has a desired impact on the recipient of the message. Um, Anyone that listens to us knows we're for Ukraine, and we're trying to present the facts as best as we can, understand them. But at the same time, we're also sympathetic toward the Ukrainian cause and the people because they deserve their own nation, their own future. It's as simple as. But at the same time, like we got to be critical of also what Ukraine does to may or may not in this case in some of these things, and also how the West responds to these things, and why international globalists in this case, sometimes they're just trying to do fake and gay things too. Anyway, so the bottom of stat, guys, POW exchange happened on the 23rd. It was a 1-for-1, 250 prisoners were exchanged under Istanbul agreements, and there was also a body exchange of 1,000 DC Ukrainian soldiers. Ukraine returned 19 Russian KIA, and Russia claims it prepared to return 3,000 Ukrainian bodies total. For security apparatus expansion and POW abuse, Putin signed a decree on which is effective January 2026, authorized the FSB to operate independent pretrial detention centers, or CISOs. The FSB, which is already linked to torture and abuse of Ukrainian POWs and civilians, will now hold broader detention authority. The centralization of state power will worsen treatment of detainees, including Ukrainian POWs and domestic Russian dissidents. We have some people locally who this will affect, probably some people they know too. Now, I'm not going to name any people we know, but if they're listening to this, yeah, just know that that's what's happening. I'm sure they probably already know, but that is something that's happening. The special alliance with the Kremlin efforts to enhance domestic surveillance and repression capabilities via the FSB and Rosguardia. The EU sanctions package was actually passed on July 18th, which took fucking forever again. So you can't do anything quickly. They're targeting oil revenue for Russia, which they introduced a dynamic oil price cap, which is again 15% below the market rate for which would be Ural crude. Currently at $47.60 a barrel, which is versus the previous $60 cap, which is good. Again, we talked about kind of the oil price dynamics for the Russian government. If it reached in the 40-ish range, that would definitely shorten the length of the war and endurance of the Russian war machine. How effective it is questionable, because the Russian shadow fleet and how much India can buy Russian oil. I don't think I included that in the notes though, but I was listening to something where I'm trying to remember the numbers a little bit. It was like $300 billion worth of crude from the Russians is usually sold, but about 60 billion is just sitting in storage, basically, whether it's on ships or in those oil silos, gas silos, whatever you want to call them. They just can't sell it though, so they have untapped capital that they can't sell because of these sanctions though. So there is some effect that these things are having on the Russian economy, and every dollar of Russian oil that's not sold is one less bullet, one less drone, one less artillery shell, right? So just wish they were a bit more aggressive with this though. Banking and financial isolation. They banned EU financial messaging services from working with 22 more Russian banks. The Chinese actually pushed back on that though, because it started affecting them, because there's this weird exchange on their border with Russia where the provinces at small banks actually interact with the Russian banking system to some degree. I forgot the exact details because I can't remember all these things, but at a certain point, this is going to affect the amount of money that the Chinese banking system will make on these proceeds, though. So that's how wide-ranging these things are. It did crack down on crypto, SPFS users, I don't know what that means, and Russian-linked investment funds. And also military support chain disruptions. They sanctioned PRC and Belarusian companies aiding the Russian defense procurement. Export bans on critical war technologies such as CNC machines, chemical propellants, and dual-use components, and some other stuff. So that is good. And the last thing here in the headlines, guys, the Trump policy. Just a couple things here. He backed a NATO military package aid and aid. Sorry, Trump pledged billions of dollars worth of U.S. weapons through NATO to go to Ukraine, and NATO will pay for it and rapidly distribute the weapon systems to Ukraine, along with Patriots also being prioritized. 17 Patriots ready to ship is what he says. People are hoping it's batteries and not just launchers. Also, secondary tariff threats against China. Trump warned of 100% secondary tariffs on Russia's trade partners unless peace is achieved within 50 days. He now lowered that down to like 10 very recently. Trump and NATO General Secretary Rutte emphasized air defense, ammo, and missile support. Again, like I was talking about earlier, like you got domestic concerns, the corruption, drones, and then the battlefront. So that's kind of the interesting rhetoric we're seeing even from the NATO General Secretary about what's important for Ukraine. Strategic framing. Trump has said that Russia using assets for war, not trade, and delaying peace talks. Rutte said 100,000 Russian soldiers have died since January 1st, 2025. And Trump has also said peace talks were close 4 times, but Russia's strikes on civilians show Putin is unserious. Um, anyway, so yeah, U.S. aid will be dynamic and will increase and decrease when it has to. So that's what's important too. All right, guys. Last few things here. I know it's a lot, but we're covering 3 weeks worth. Um, Russian mobilization and allied mobilization for them. North Korean military support to Russia is also being included with drone collaboration. And Bunov has reported that up to 30,000 North Korean personnel may join Russia's war effort under the guise of, quote, volunteer contracts. Air defense transfers. Russia's transferred at least one Pantsir S-1 air defense system in North Korea in violation of UN sanctions. And drone production surged. We already talked about that. Ukraine's front intelligence insight estimates that Russia's launched over 28,700 Shahed drones since 2022, and there's been a little over 2,700 launched in June 2025 alone, which means Russia's averaging about 1,850 Garan drones per month as of spring 2025. Yeah, there's also development with Laos, which is odd because of Cambodia and the Thai connection. Also, with what's going on. Ukraine's GUR claims that Russia recruited 50 Laotian military engineers for demining in Kursk under humanitarian aid pretense. Laos denies sending military personnel abroad, but Russia may use the deployment to symbolically portray growing international support. And the Laotian motivation for this shows that they may seek closer ties to Russia to diversify away from Chinese economic dominance. So it's interesting because you're seeing Iran move closer to China because Russia didn't step up, but then the Laotians trying to move away from China and get closer to the Russians. This may seem odd because they're a landlocked country, but how to put it? Cambodia kind of siding with the Russia-China side of the world. They would probably move through there. Is what I would guess. Ukraine mobilization here, guys. Air defense aid and defense industry cooperation between UK and Germany has increased. UK has decided to sign a new defense agreement with Ukraine, committing over 5,000 air defense interceptors from the Thales air defense. And Germany's Friedrich Merz has stated a readiness to purchase Patriot systems from the US for Ukraine on their behalf. And Germany has delivered another IRIS-T air defense system to Ukraine. Lithuania pledged about $35 million, and NATO cooperation is going to allow. Ukraine has signed an agreement with NATO Command Transformation, allowing personal access to the JTEC Center, and that's about it. So, rear activity. We talked a little bit about this already. There's still a widespread shortage of water in Mariupol. but it also includes Donetsk City, Berdyansk, Melitopol, and some other cities. They face acute water in many areas. Water is provided only every 5 to 6 days. This is also due to the lack of infrastructure repair. Russian forces destroyed the main water pipeline for the Donets River to the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, which was a key pre-war source for clean water. The Russians are saying they're going to repurpose water systems. Ukrainian forces reported Russian troops are using dry water pipes as bunkers. I'm sorry, we already talked about that. I'm sorry. This is why I want to get to. Sorry, the unsafe alternatives and propaganda. Occupation authorities have floated using mining effluent as drinking water and are distributing contaminated bottled water. Meanwhile, they use bots to censor and hide the crisis online. Talked about the child deportations. There's a few thousand being deported to St. Petersburg summer camp, and what we talked about with the children in the drone factory. Russia's also setting up a nuclear industry pipeline for 2,000 children in Haradar. They were sent to a science-themed camp in Crimea, funded by Rosneft, which is the Russian nuclear company. So they're hoping to funnel the youth in that area to nuclear careers, so they could just start training up Ukrainian children to serve the Russian nuclear energy company, though. So, and also send them to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, though, too. So, and the passportization continues, the erasure of identity for Ukrainians also, and the Tartars in Crimea, and the property seizures are also ongoing in that area. So that does it for the presentation, guys. I know that was a little bit longer, had to cover a lot of weeks, and I also had to dump some things too, just for the sake of brevity. But that does it for the first half of the show, and this is where we have to step off from YouTube, because YouTube doesn't like the next part of the show, and this is where we start getting having a little bit more fun. So for anyone on YouTube that's watching this, we do a show every Monday at 6 p.m. Western Time. Catch us on Odyssey or Rumble. Look us up under the Warcast, and you'll see any of our past shows. And if you want to watch us, catch us on those platforms at that time. So.